Welcome to the Dropout Multimillionaire Podcast, hosted by best-selling author and serial entrepreneur Brian Will. Here we go.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode of the Dropout Multimillionaire Podcast. This podcast is based on my second book of the same name. It was a Wall Street Journal best-selling book. I am your host, Brian Will, and I will be leading you down this journey of success and failure and hopefully learning from both. Today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Helen Sidhu. Did I pronounce that correctly, Helen?
You did.
Okay, good. I've actually known Helen for a number of years, or more accurately, I've known of Helen for probably 10 to 12 years. She's got quite a big name in the insurance and the lead gen industry. And I've watched her over the last 10, 12 years build this company of hers up quite impressively. And then I watched her sell it, a relatively successful exit. And now she is starting yet another company, which puts her in the category of a serial entrepreneur. So welcome to the show, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to go through just some questions and just as, again, a brief backdrop on the show. We're about people launching businesses, struggling to grow their businesses, exiting businesses. You've done all three of those once, and you're starting on your second round here. So one of the things I always premise the show with is this is not a rah-rah show. I don't want to hear how great everything was and how wonderful life is and how you're the most intelligent, smartest business person in the whole wide world and everything you touch turns to gold. And that may be true, but somewhere along the way, I'm going to guess you had some days where you woke up at 4 a.m. thinking, holy crap, and you went home at 5 o'clock thinking, holy crap, and my world is crashing around me, and you had to make some tough mental decisions. Is that fair?
That's very fair.
That's very fair. Good. So for the audience listening, I've known you through your previous company, which was called Torchlight. Was that the first company you started?
It was. I started this very early on. And when actually I partnered up with my friends, they actually told me, go get a job. So I was
I love that. Go get a job.
Yeah. So I was almost kind of lucky in the sense that when I joined Torchlight, it was still very early, a very small business, but I was probably the fourth person. So I kind of missed the initial startup mode of Torchlight.
Interesting. So you didn't technically launch Torchlight.
I did not technically launch Torchlight.
So, but you were the CEO when I knew you. So how did that go? How did that happen?
So 4 years in, when Torchlight was somewhat of a business, right? When you start out, you kind of try a lot of different things. Most of the things don't work out, or they do work out, but it's just not enough to make a business. Torchlight, tried many different projects. And the one project that really worked was creating sort of this technology to buy leads and resell leads. So that is when I joined the company. And my first project was to develop that software with the main developer. And as I developed it, I was talking to people in the industry. So I was kind of selling it at the same time and getting clients on board. It kind of just naturally, did it at the same time. And that's sort of how Torchlight really grew.
And how did you end up being the CEO? What happened to the original founders?
So I was one of the original founders, but they were really the other founder was really the main technology person behind Torchlight. And the third person was really the operations. I was in charge of the marketing, legal, accounting, really sort of the different parts of the business. And
that's interesting. So you came in after they started, but they brought you in as a partner. Is that correct? Is that how it happened? So, And it's interesting in my book, one of the things we talk about is that almost every successful business has 4 different personalities, right? And I have not had this conversation with you, but I'm going to throw out these 4 personalities and see if this resonates with you. So every business has to have an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are an interesting breed. They're terrible at details. They think in bullet points. They're 30,000 feet. I call the entrepreneur the most as well as the least important person in any business. They're very important because they set agendas and they have vision. They're the worst because they can't get anything done by themselves and they need to have a team around. Does that make sense?
Very much so. And one of my very good friend and my partner is that person.
Yeah. So the other personalities technically are the salesperson, the manager, and then we call the technician, right? So salesperson's got to sell whatever the product is you've got. The manager's got to manage the back end of the office and make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and the correct taxes are paid and the filings are done. And then your technician is the person, one of our companies, it was Joe, and he sat in his office smoking cigarettes in front of 17 screens. And, actually, he was the duck on the water. If he was back there doing crazy stuff and it just flowed, right? So would you say that's a fair assessment of what it takes to run a successful company?
Very fair assessment. And
where did you fit?
So I was the sales and the manager.
Okay. So I have also said in the book that it is very easy to be two of these personalities. It is damn near impossible to be more than that. And
absolutely. No, we certainly had the technician. We had the entrepreneur who also did sales. And then I sort of did sales and helped with the management.
Yeah.
Making sure everything was, squared away and.
Entrepreneurs are good at sales because the vision is what they sell. Right.
Yes.
And managers can be good at sales because they bring the practicality of the product. And I found that when they team up, they actually do really well. And one of our companies, which it's called Connecture today, it was Simply Health back then before we switched. Our CTO, I used to call him the smartest guy in the room. And it was funny because we would go do a sales presentation. I literally knew nothing. I mean, nothing about software. He would give me like 5 or 6 buzzwords on the way to the presentation. You're going to use this word, and this word. And then I would stand up there and act like I knew what I was talking about. And then they would ask me a question, and it was just funny because Mark would always be sitting behind me, and I always called him the smartest guy in the room. And they'd ask me a question, and Mark knew the drill. I would just turn and look at Mark, and he knew that was his key to wow them with all this stuff that I didn't know what he was talking about. And I'd turn around and look at him, I go, that makes sense, doesn't it? And they'd be like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I was clueless, but I was the sales guy and the entrepreneur, and he was the technician and the IT guy. So that's interesting. So you had these personalities in your business, and your business did relatively well.
Absolutely. And we all got along. We all had a good time. And we certainly, had a lot of, take us 1 step forward, 3 steps back type of days, but it worked out.
And tell me, like, for the layman listening to this, because you got people in different industries that are going to listen to this, what did Torchlight do from a basic level? Don't confuse me, because again, I'm not the tech guy. So what did you really do?
Yep. So we started by marketing online, really generating consumer intent, consumers who were looking for a new auto insurance quote or a home insurance quote. And we would take that consumer information and sell it to insurance companies for them to call on the person and, give them a quote and essentially hopefully have them buy. But what our technology figured out that we were good at was that we could purchase consumer information from various sources and resell those to the insurance companies.
We call that aggregation. Is that a correct word?
Correct.
So you did a little bit of base lead generation.
Yeah, we did a little bit of both. And, it's when you start out, you always sort of have this vision of what exactly you're going to do. And then you kind of deviate from that a little bit to kind of really find what works. And kind of once we knew that our technology of buying and reselling leads was successful, we said, let's try to build that into a call environment. So then Torchlight really developed sort of a call platform that was internally where we would be able to do the same thing with phone calls. And that's really, I would say, what propelled Torchlight to the next level when we were not just doing leads, but also buying and reselling phone calls.
It's funny. I used to work for the big company in Chicago that, went public, turned into a $6 billion company. And I think now I could buy them with one of my MasterCards.
Yes.
It's a joke, by the way, if anybody's listening. But we did the same thing. And I used to do this when I do a presentation to people. I'd say, look, we generate so much and then we aggregate so much, right? Because the aggregation is what allows our company to expand and contract based on volume, right? If I have only internal lead generation and my volume, my requests for leads go down today, I'm losing money. So if I can use the aggregation as an accordion piece, then my business is going to stay on track. Is that kind of what you guys were doing too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We always enjoyed generating our own leads, right? This was like the marketing in us. But really, we saw that our technology was really capable of scale. And for these large insurance companies, when they have large call centers, they need volume and consistent volume. Consistency was very key for them. So we were able to sort of deliver that service to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm sure you've talked to Ryan a little bit. Ryan's a friend of ours, and he was on one of our previous episodes. and he has launched a new technology company again back in the space, his first acquisition. And I'm kind of consulting and working with him on this, and one of the first call centers we're dealing with. They do like 20,000 policies a month or some crazy number, which means they got to be buying 100,000 leads a month. I mean, it's an enormous volume. It's crazy. So when your company, prior to the sale, and you probably had some issues with COVID, I'm guessing, but how many employees did you have at that time?
So when we sold, we probably had close to 35 to 40 employees.
Okay.
We had a good solid group. We had a team of developers, a creative team, a media team, and IHC, the company that purchased us, actually made a 25% acquisition back in 2019. They were a big client, and we kind of became more and more and more their sort of marketing arm. So it was a very nice, it's not like we were out there shopping the business. It just kind of naturally happened. Mm-hmm. So then they kind of had 25% of the business when that happened. Like I said, we really ended up becoming truly their sort of back-end office, marketing office for them. And then they did the rest of the acquisition in 2020 in the middle of lockdown.
Wow. I want to get back to that point that they were a major customers of yours, but to finish this thought, so you were maybe 35 employees. I assume you contracted during the COVID period and then started ramping back up afterwards, or did you maintain your staff?
So we actually maintained our staff. We maintained everything.
Interesting. And not to put you on the spot, but you guys started this company from scratch. When? What year?
In 2013.
2013, and you ended up doing your first partial exit in 2019, so 6 years later, and then a year later sold. Were you 5 to 10 million, 10 to 15? Were you over 20? What was your gross revenue numbers just in general?
It was 10 to 15 million.
So you'd built from 0 to 10 to $15 million company. That's awesome. You guys did good. So you were pretty sizable. And I'm guessing it was pretty easy the whole way, right? No issues, no problems. You never had any bad days.
None. No bad days.
You guys were just awesome business people.
Yeah, no, we weren't at all. We had every single type of issue that you can think of, between compliance issues, clients, not paying.
Clients didn't pay you?
Yeah,
that's shocking.
Yeah. And, anytime we felt like we were kind of getting somewhere, but I guess that's life. Something would happen and would be like, we just lost everything we've made in the past 3 months.
Get a job.
Yeah. So, but, we always try to, take every single mistake as a lesson. And they are mistakes that you kind of quickly, some of them you quickly forget, some of them you don't. But I like to think that we were always kind of, looking ahead and just kind of focusing what was in front of us.
What is it that, if you're having a bad day and the world's falling apart, what is it that made you guys go, you know what, we just got to, pull ourselves up by the laces and keep this sucker going?
Yeah, I mean, we were always very sort of conservative, right? So when we had bad months, we were very, hey, if this isn't going to work out, we have to be upfront with everyone and we got to make decisions. We certainly were very, just because I think we were bootstrapped, we didn't really have any other options. We saw it how it is. Something that we did at Torchlight that is not done in a lot of companies, with a sort of the middle to senior management group. I think it was about every quarter, we would actually share with everyone our P&L.
Interesting. Even every employee knew the P&L.
Yeah, to some extent. And, they were kind of like in the main categories. It was more for people to understand where our income was coming from and our expenses were coming from. So we were very much an open book, and people kind of understood what we would need to make in terms of profit to kind of have the business running, to keep the business running.
I want to focus on this for a second, because this is an interesting one. And I do partial P&L sharing with our management team, but
I would say not every single line item was on there. We kind of like grouped.
Did they see your profitability?
Yeah.
So you showed them.
Yeah.
And did you? And it works both ways, I guess. I would be afraid. I would be afraid, because of some of the experiences I've had in selling companies in the past, that some of your employees who weren't actually equity members would be like, "Holy crap, you're making, $200,000 a month. Why am I only getting paid $75,000? I want more money."
Sure. So we were actually, to be honest, we were kind of paid the same amount. We kind of always saw ourselves as same line as employees. So I think everyone was kind of aware that we were kind of making the same amount. as everyone. So all the salaries were kind of lumped into one bucket, our expenses. But it's interesting. I always have this memory that for certain people that you wouldn't think of, it was actually one of the developers. When he saw that, he kind of like made sense and almost, I don't remember, he was at a meeting and he said, well, if we did more of this, would that increase sort of like our revenue or like, and decrease our expenses? And we're like, yes, it would. And then that became sort of a project that we did. So, again, does it work for everyone? Absolutely not. It's certainly not a common practice, but that's something that we did. And
that's awesome.
I think, and the feedback was generally positive.
So I would give you my flip side example of that. And there's no right and wrong answers here, by the way. People do different things. I've always said, I can't tell you that the way I do things is the only way to do things. It's just the way I did them and it worked, right? There's a lot of different ways to make money, a lot of different businesses you can do. I can only give you the experiences that I've had. My very first company I sold, this goes back to 1997. And it's when I launched this very first call center to sell health insurance, right? Yeah. Never been done before. And I got an agreement with Assurant Health to let us do fax applications, believe it or not, instead of having to drive out to see a client. So we started doing these fax applications. This is 1999 and eHealth Insurance had kicked off and Simply Health had kicked off. And these guys were looking for a way to virtually sell health insurance. And we had the only call center doing it. So we got bought very quickly. Well, I'll never forget one of my employees who was my top salesperson, good guy, top salesperson, making great money. We announced the sale and he comes to me and he goes, well, how much am I getting? Mm-hmm. I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I mean, you're selling the company and I'm the one doing a bunch of sales. I should get my percentage of the sales as part of the exit. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, where were you when I spent all this money to start it? Where were you when I was taking your salary out of my pocket and losing money? Where were you when, and now all of a sudden you want in on the back end. And so I got leery of people in the organization knowing how much money we make because of what I'll call that natural jealousy kind of thing. But you guys took a totally different route and it worked for you. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they were certainly, when the sale happened during COVID, it was difficult for some employees. We had people leave naturally, which was, it's okay. We understand. But yeah, that was our approach. And I think
so you were not an experienced business person when you came into this thing, basically.
I was not. And I was not an experienced person selling a business at all.
Did you, prior to joining Torchlight, did you have that entrepreneurial drive? Did being in business for yourself, was it something you wanted to do? Or were you just like, oh, I need a job and these guys are offering me equity?
Yeah, I think I always like to come up with ideas. I've always been very organized. I think, the one example that my friend told me, saying, I knew you were an entrepreneur. So when I went to college at GW, I played squash and the team was brand new. And right away I said, you know what, GW, our team is, we don't have great players. You should recruit players from, internationally. And they were like, oh, great idea. And then lo and behold, 3 years later, GW had a really good squash team because I, kind of put the word out there that we should recruit, kids from other countries who have been playing squash their whole life. So I don't know, is it in me? Maybe I don't know. I don't know if I would call myself a serial entrepreneur, but I love to learn different things, to do different things.
Well, guess what? You're on business number 2. That makes you a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. No, it's good.
Let me ask you this. As you were in the early days building the companies, can you remember back to what I would consider the biggest holy crap moment? We screwed this up. I mean, what was your biggest failure? Oh my God, I can't believe we did that.
Yeah, I made the biggest mistake out of everyone in the whole company. To make a long story short, and this is more for people in the lead gen space, but some people might remember this. It was a holiday weekend, and I was going to Florida for vacation, and I was in charge of long story short, I fat fingered something in our system that made it so we spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars purchasing leads on a weekend and paying way too much for them. So
somebody had a good day.
Yes. I made a lot of people very happy that weekend, but that was the biggest mistake I've made. It was a technical error. I made a technical error. And what I did was, I actually realized that error, I think on a Sunday at noon. It had been going on all day Saturday, half a day on Sunday. And I had a oh shit moment where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I calmed down and I called every single client that I had sold leads to, and most of them took my calls, and I explained to them the situation, and half of them not laughed, but said, yeah, that's clearly an error. And everyone was kind of willing to work with me to kind of, and that was, I think it showed that I had good relationships.
How about you and your partners? Was there any yelling involved in that situation?
Well, so the person who figured it out, I didn't even catch it, was calling my phone. I wasn't picking up. Finally, he reaches me and he's like, you need to go look at the reporting center. And I was like, why? Why do I, and he was like, you'll see. Yes. But, it was a mistake. And essentially right after that, we put in a double, anytime you were changing something in our technology system, you had to have someone essentially do a double checker.
Yes. Yep.
So you learn.
So you learned a lesson, which made your company better moving forward.
Yes.
Hey, that's I'll give you one.
It was an expensive lesson, but
I'm going to give you one of my bullet points on business success, right? Have you ever heard this phrase, you have to fail to succeed?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's heard that, and I call bullshit. Okay. Failing in and of itself doesn't do you any good. You have to learn from the failure, move forward in order to get to that next level of success, right? Yeah. If you hadn't learned anything, that would probably happen again and again. But what you did is you failed, then you learned, and then it became a success in the future. So you have to fail to learn. I hate it when people say that. You have to fail and learn to succeed. That's the deal, not just fail to succeed. So sounds like you guys learned from that one, and you're a better company because of it.
Yeah, I mean, after that, I was double, triple checking. You just subconsciously
learned.
You learn and
you learn
differently.
Because we don't know what we're doing, and we learn along the way. And as long as we learn, then we become better and we become more successful. I remember years and years ago, and I think I'm much older than you, Helen, but back when we first got started, we were using auto dialers. This is pre-internet, right? Mm-hmm. And so we would load up lists of names in these auto dialers, and it would just call people all day long. I had a couple of DS3s. I mean, we were pumping out millions and millions of calls, right? So I remember one week we had our IT guy who was supposed to load a new list in the dialer every day. And so we would break the cities down into segments, and then we would dial different segments so we weren't hitting the same segment constantly. Well, for whatever reason, and I don't know how it happened, but he loaded the same 50,000 names into a DS3, which can make 1 million calls a day. And we ran that 50,000 names for 3 days.
Wow.
We called the same people no less than 50 times over and over and over and over and over before we finally figured out what's going on with the dialer over there. Like, oh my God, holy shit. We're just pounding these people with phone calls. Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this again, for people who are out there starting or running a business, did your problems ever end, or was it just a constant series of learning?
It was a constant series of learnings. I wouldn't say the problems were just different, which is kind of nice. At least you don't really have the same problems twice when you're kind of doing a business. So all the problems are sort of different. You kind of get through them, and they kept going. But, I think back and I'm like, okay, what were the main problems? And I think they are overshadowed by, the small wins that we had. And that's what I think is important to kind of remember. Celebrate the small wins, even if it's not that, a huge win at all. It's okay. Because I think that's what kind of gets you excited to kind of keep going.
Yeah. So when did you guys decide to sell? And why did you decide to sell? Or did they approach you?
Yeah. So once again, we weren't really shopping. It just kind of naturally happened. They kind of approached us. It made sense. We were kind of at the phase that, okay, how do we get bigger, or do we just kind of stay doing what we're doing? They had a need. We had a good relationship with them. So we just kind of went for it. And we said, we'll kind of see what happens.
And how did the acquisition go? You split yours up into two parts, so that's a little different, but how did it go?
Yeah, so it went well. I would say, once again, you can't really learn how to sell a business from a textbook. You just have to go through it. I learned a lot from going through the process. I think it was a little bit different in the sense that the very early on sort of negotiation kind of happened face to face, and then COVID happened. So everything kind of got done over Zoom, which was a little bit weird at first. And it was like the early Zoom days, so because it really happened in March of 2020. So, it went okay. I would say it went okay. It happened. And
were there ever moments where you thought this deal's going to fall apart, or was it pretty solid?
No, absolutely. So we sold to a public company, and I think it was March 16th, whenever the stock market just crashed. I think it was right around then. We're like, oh no, their stock crashed, and we're like, okay, are they going to pull out? Are they going to stay? And they kept their word, and they kept moving forward with it. I would say my biggest lesson from selling a business for anyone who's thinking about selling is do have conversations about the working capital of the business. I think don't wait till the end. I think that kind of came into play in terms of, towards the end of the deal, which got a little rocky just because, again, it was COVID. We knew we were entering COVID. We didn't really know what was going to happen. I mean, we had a business in call centers. And people couldn't be around people in the call center. Yeah. So we knew that, I wouldn't say we lost clients, but clients, stopped advertising their marketing budget as they should during the first initial lockdown. So we knew we were entering a difficult phase, which again, kind of brought some tension to the table towards the very end. But, we kind of gave in, we gave in and sold the business and ended up working there for close to 2 years after that. And it was good.
So if on your next sale, you're going to have a lot more experience, know what to ask, know what to expect, be a lot more comfortable.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. Are you glad you sold?
I'm glad I sold. It kind of almost gave me the freedom to kind of maybe do something else. So that's interesting. And I really enjoyed, to be honest, working for them as an employee, just kind of like getting all the, everything was on my shoulders when you're kind of running and managing the company. So that was a nice change.
So you went from entrepreneur back to being an employee.
Yeah.
But you did quit and start another company. So at some point you had to be like,
Yeah. Well, I had a little baby. That's why that was kind of my reason for kind of quitting.
As opposed to a big
COVID,
baby.
Yeah. So plus COVID, plus my no childcare available. So there was a lot of factors there, but I took a little time off with this baby. And then I kind of said, I'll kind of see what happens. And our original founders, the initial group, had this idea that they wanted to build a database, kind of a product, something very different. And they said, would you want to join and help us? And I said, okay, I'll come and help you.
No question. You just jumped right in.
And I just jumped right in, and that's where we are. And what's funny is we're back to I'm working with my head technician, back on working and developing the product. And it's kind of fun because it's back to, doing what we did maybe 8-9 years ago.
Are you working as hard on this one as you did the last one?
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's different. It's funny though. It's all the little challenges are there again. It's nothing's different, and they're different. Yeah, the challenges are different, but it's still, one step forward, steps back every day.
Business is business. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask the question, what are you not struggling with in this go around that you struggled with on the last one?
So I think we have a very specific product in mind that we're looking to build and sell, versus before it was more service-based. We were a service company, right? We service the leads and for clients. So I think this has more of a straight kind of purpose versus Torchlight, where we had a lot of employees. We had to figure out how to grow. This, I don't know where it's going to go. It's just a product that we built. We're looking to get a couple of clients on and maybe kind of sell it off.
Are you pre-revenue, or have you actually started generating sales?
No, we just have one client. We're close to maybe hopefully getting a second one, but no, just, yeah. We're kind of giving out things for free for now. It's the.
All right. I'm going to get philosophical with you here in the last couple of questions. So if you could go back to 2013 when you started, what would you teach yourself, knowing what you know today? What would you walk in and say, hey, Helen, here's what you need to know. I'm just going to tell you, I got 2 minutes. I'm going to here's what you need to know. Over the next 6 years, what would you tell yourself?
I would say really focus on the financials and accounting of the company. Really be thorough. Yep. Really know what's going on. Don't do it. Really look into it. And really think about when you're scaling, whether it's time to part ways with some employees.
Interesting.
I think it's easy to start small, keep them, you're kind of friendly, but it's important to kind of know when the company is going in a direction that it might just not be best for others.
I have a challenge that I'm extremely loyal to my employees, even when it's hurting me.
Yes.
And
yes.
that is something I've struggled with. So that's very, very good advice.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the big three, right?
Okay.
So best piece of advice you ever got?
I don't think it was told to me, but I did hear it. And it was always every single issues or challenge as a learning lesson. And with every single mistake I've made, I'm always like, oh, this was an expensive lesson, but I learned. So try to just stick to that. Yeah.
So you've told me that if you're going to go back and talk to yourself, your two big things were be willing to part ways with employees if they're not helping the company move forward at the speed that it needs to move forward. And two, you need to manage your numbers, right? So if you're talking to somebody here that has a business, they've already launched and they're sitting here struggling either with profitability or with growth, what would you tell them?
I would say, keep at it, even if it's really small wins. Try to find ways to just be a tiny, tiny bit more profitable in some way, shape, or form, because the little bit that you do get profitable, you can always expand on that.
Right.
Versus always trying to completely switch directions and do something else and test something else.
Yeah.
Take what you have and maybe just tweak it a little bit just to see, because if that works, then you know that you can kind of grow that.
Yeah.
part.
I liken this to, and I've said this before, you have to be very careful not to cannibalize your business by burning off your cash, taking care of personal wants and needs, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like taking care of a baby. Mom's going to feed the baby before mom eats most of the time because the baby needs to be fed, right? Don't kill your business by cannibalizing it, by living too big of a lifestyle, buying too nice of a car, getting too big of a house, spending money on things you don't need to spend it on. You got to take care of that business while it's growing so that it can support you.
Absolutely. Be very conservative. And the one thing we always said as a group is that we were, in the sense that we would always kind of say, all right, if the business stops today, we lose every single client, what's our run rate?
Yeah.
And we always like to have like 6 to almost a year long run rate. Just because we said, you never know what could happen. And once we kind of got to that was always something that we said. It was an understanding that we weren't living on the edge, that, if something happened, we would have to figure something out the next month. We would want to take our time and have a good, I think we had a run rate of maybe like 9 to almost 12 months.
Nice.
So,
and now I've got somebody listening to the show that is in the process of wanting to sell their business, and they're starting to have people come and talk to them. You just finished this process a couple of years ago. What do they need to be thinking about?
I would think about to see if there's a way that they can really rely on someone going through the process that's not a lawyer or an accountant, someone who's really just sold a business. We didn't really have that. We were just 3 of us that had never sold a business in it. And yes, like I said, we had our lawyers kind of telling us things and our accountants telling us things. But I think we would have benefited. Now, on the flip side, the company that we sold to had purchased a lot of companies. So they had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
And I think if we would have had someone who kind of had gone through the process, I think some things could have been done better.
Easier, faster, better, less stressful.
Easier. No, I don't know if easy is the right way, but less friction, maybe some points, like I said, there were some friction points, like the working capital was, I think, discussed too late in the deal. There were just little things like that, what to do with employees, how to communicate with them. We just didn't have that. And as the business owners, we spent so much time, honestly, reviewing documents from the lawyers and the accountants. And that's kind of what it felt. It was a lot of work.
So you would bring some more help in?
I would bring someone, yeah.
So this is interesting, and this is going to be our final thought here. I tell people this all the time. I say, you have an Apple phone by any chance, Helen?
Yes.
You have an Apple phone. Okay, so you're familiar with Apple, right? $3 trillion company, biggest company in the world. Do you know who runs Apple? Who's the CEO? A guy named Tim Cook.
Okay, yeah.
So Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple, $3 trillion company. They're huge, right? Most profitable company on planet Earth. And Tim Cook has a board of directors. And do you know what the board of directors does for Tim? They come in and they give him advice.
Yeah.
Once every 3 or 4 months, they sit down at a big table. You can imagine this giant table with donuts and big things of water. And Tim, they say, okay, Tim, what are your problems and what can we help you with? And they take all their experience from what they've done in different industries and they give Tim advice. And Tim takes all their advice and he wraps it up and then he makes his decisions on how to move forward, right? So then I take a look at all these small business owners or medium size or even, some of the bigger businesses. And these guys are out there trying to do it themselves and make all their own decisions. And they think that they have all the answers. And I'm like, if Tim Cook, who runs the biggest company on planet Earth, needs a board of directors or people to help him, what in the hell makes you think that you have all the answers? Right? That's pretty much what you just said. Bring some people in that know how to help you, that have been there, done that.
Yeah.
Not lawyers, not accountants, not bullshit. People that have been there, done that, that can say, yeah, made that mistake, yeah, made that mistake. Yeah,
exactly. It's more this like, yep, we made this mistake. Look out for this.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. This has been great. You have any last words?
Nope.
Put you on the spot there, didn't I? Well, listen, Helen, I appreciate you being on the show today. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when this will be out, but I'll let you know whenever it is.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that wraps up today's show.
Soon.
I appreciate everybody listening. Hope you come back for the next episode of the Dropout Multi-Millionaire Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Will. And remember, you have to be in the game to win the game.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dropout Multi-Millionaire. To learn more about how we can help you with your business, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, visit www.brianwillmedia.com or the Dropout MM on Instagram.